Everybody knows how difficult it is to repeat as NCAA Tournament champions. It's part of why it hasn't been done since 2007 when Billy Donovan's Florida team accomplished defeat, and before that you have to go all the way back to 1992 to when Duke did it. But in the modern age of college basketball, repeating is even more difficult. With an enhanced emphasis on the NBA draft and player mobility via the transfer portal, building, let alone keeping, a championship caliber roster is a tall task. But despite those odds, Bill Self and Kansas have looked to achieve the impossible, because it almost seems like the 2023 version of the Jayhawks have been just as good as their championship-winning predecessors. While they lost key stars like Ochai Agbaji, Christian Brown, and David McCormick, so far this year, Kansas really hasn't seemed to skip a beat. They boast a record of 23-5, including an impressive 11-4 in the brutal Big 12. They have a nation-leading 14 Quadrant 1 wins, and they are one of 4 teams in the country with both a top 20 offensive and defensive rating, sharing that distinction with Houston, Alabama, and Purdue. With its star power and coaching, it looks like Kansas is one of the best teams in the country yet again. So let's talk more about the Jayhawks, and I'll explain why Kansas has a very good chance at repeating as national champs. This is Rock Chalk Repeat. So when I mentioned that Florida was the last team to repeat as national champions back in 2007, I should have also mentioned that they returned their top 7 scorers from the 2006 team, which was unprecedented then and flat out non-existent now. It's important to note that Kansas is working with a totally different loadout, and while they do return some key pieces from last year's team, they did lose their top 2 scorers from last year in Ochai Agbaji and Christian Brown to the NBA. Now, if you factored that into your historical reasoning, you'll find that the last team to repeat as national champions after losing their top 2 scorers from the year prior was the 1972 UCLA Bruins, who managed to withstand the losses of Sidney Wicks and Curtis Rowe en route to another title. But it's also important to mention that that team had a future Hall of Famer in Bill Walton dominating the paint. So again, Kansas is climbing an Everest-level hill, but I still think they have a really good chance at repeating, and it all comes down to a starting 5 that might be one of the most important groups in the entire country. Kansas' starting 5 of Dajuan Harris, Gradey, Kevin McCullar, Jalen Wilson, and KJ Adams account for around 83% of the team's total offensive production, scoring a combined 64.5 points per game. In fact, the Jayhawks' 12 bench points per game rank second to last among teams currently ranked in the AP Top 25, but because their starters are so good together, the impact of their lack of bench production is pretty minimal. Leading this elite starting 5 is veteran point guard Dajuan Harris. While Harris only averages around 8 points per game, his impact is felt on a variety of levels, as he is the undisputed conductor of the Jayhawk offense. His 6.3 assists per game leads the team by a wide margin, as Harris shines as a composed decision maker who rarely makes mistakes. His assist to turnover ratio of 3.2 ranks first in the Big 12 among players who average more than 2 assists per game, and he just provides such a calming energy for Kansas. Harris also shines as a point of attack defender, as you can typically find him hounding the opposing team's guard and disrupting the rhythm of their offense. Harris's 1.9 steals per game is good for 4th in the Big 12, and that's an indicator of how intelligent of a defender he is. While Harris's struggles as a scorer have been well documented throughout his career in Lawrence, he's actually become much more viable in that area this year. He's posting career best in points per game, field goal percentage, and 3-point percentage, and while these are all on relatively low volume, it still offers an encouraging sign for Kansas moving forward. He has gone from a guy that teams were comfortable leaving open from 3 last year to a guy who's knocking down 41% of his attempts and at least requires some defensive attention this year. A guy who by no means struggles to score is junior forward Jalen Wilson. Wilson has been a key cog for Kansas since his freshman year, but he's really broken out as one of the best players in the country for the Jayhawks this season, as the 6'8 wing is averaging 19.9 points and 8.5 rebounds per game, both of which lead the Big 12. So far, Wilson looks like the shoe-in Big 12 Player of the Year, as he's taken total control of the Jayhawk offense in the wake of key departures from Agbaji and Brown. He's emerged as a slasher who's comfortable scoring at all 3 levels, and while his overall field goal percentage has dipped as a result of increased volume, the improvements Wilson has made from last year are more than noticeable. He's hitting 34% of his threes compared to 26% a year ago, and this is coming on a healthy 6 attempts per game. He's also much more confident as a ball handler and self-creator this season, and what's also critical to his improvement is that he's added the traits of a go-to scorer while keeping the parts of his game that made him so great early in his career. He still thrives as a transition threat and a cutter, and he's attempting 5.5 free throw attempts per game, which leads the team. Overall, Wilson's emergence as one of the country's best players has made this Kansas team even more dangerous than expected heading into the final month of the season. Joining Wilson on the wing is Texas Tech transfer Kevin McCullar. After 3 encouraging seasons in Lubbock that saw him average close to 9 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game for his career, McCullar decided to head to Kansas for his senior season after considering the NBA draft and Gonzaga. While he does average around 11 points and 7 rebounds a game, defensively is where McCullar stands out the most, as he is probably the best and most impactful defender that the Jayhawks have on the roster. The 6'6" wing is strong for his size and is incredibly difficult to shake if you're an opposing player, and he seems to have a sixth sense on the floor, but instead of seeing dead people, McCullar sees opportunities to create turnovers. His 2.1 steals per game and steal rate of 3.9% both rank second in the Big 12, and per Bart Torvik's DPRPG stat, which serves as a catch-all measure for determining how good of a defender a player is, McCullar ranks as one of the most valuable players on that end in the country. Now, perhaps a weakness of this Kansas team is that they don't really have a ton of size. Kansas's tallest listed starter is actually Jalen Wilson at 6'8", but the guy who's been playing the role of makeshift center is 6'7" sophomore KJ Adams. A 4-star recruit coming out of high school, Adams played a limited but encouraging role as a freshman, but this year, he's emerged as an integral piece to Kansas's hopes to repeat as national champs, as he's averaging around 11 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 1 block a night, while also having started every single game for the Jayhawks. Despite improving in nearly every statistical category during his sophomore year, Adams' box score impact still seems somewhat muted, but he's an incredibly important piece in this Kansas offense thanks to his underrated passing ability. Kansas loves running pick and roll with Dajuan Harris and Adams, and he's really impressed as a short roll passer in the Jayhawk offense. While he only averages around 2 assists per game, this doesn't accurately reflect his terrific vision and ability as a distributor. Adams' ability to think on his feet as a processor of the game while maintaining his composure allows Kansas' offense to flow the way Bill Self wants it to. He can obviously pass, but he's also a great finisher as a lob threat, and can even post up a little bit as well. Defensively, Adams is switchable and isn't afraid to take on players that are bigger than him, and he's also quick on his feet with his 1.7 stocks per game ranking third on the team behind McCullar and Harris. The versatility of Adams makes him a key weapon that Kansas can employ in a variety of ways, and that will pay dividends as we enter the final stretch of the season. And finally, rounding out the Jayhawks starting five is the man, the myth, the legend, Gradey Dick. And this guy is just an absolute flamethrower, as he's knocking down 41% of his threes on 6 attempts per game. Dick was a 5-star recruit coming out of prep giant Sunrise Christian Academy, and was a pretty decorated player, as he took home Gatorade National Player of the Year honors his senior season. Dick has been one of the best freshmen in the country in terms of fitting in and helping his team win games. He's averaging 15 points per game on 45, 41, 85 shooting splits, and he's also grabbing 5 rebounds per game as well. The main appeal of Dick, though, is just how awesome he is as a shooter. His numbers are great, but you really need to watch him when he's cooking to get a full grasp of how dominant he can be. Take Kansas's blowout win against Missouri, for example. In a 9.5 minute span in the first half, Dick had a layup, a mid-range jumper, a 3, another layup, and to top things off, another 3. By the time the first half was over, Kansas was winning 50-33, and Dick had erupted for 15 points in the first 20 minutes. The type of quick strike scoring that Gradey Dick offers is incredibly valuable because he doesn't need a lot to get going, and once he does, it's really hard to slow him down. His shot versatility in terms of movement is also incredibly balanced, and he's smart enough to be aware of his threat level, as he'll often punish defenders who are committing to guarding to 3, with cuts to the basket where he can finish with some swagger and acrobatics. Now, just because Kansas' starting 5 carries a majority of the load, doesn't mean that the team totally lacks key pieces rounding out their rotation. Backup guards Bobby Pettiford and Joseph Yesufu give Kansas some backcourt depth, as Pettiford can run point while Yesufu can score in bunches, and freshman big man Ernest Uday Jr. has greatly improved throughout the season and should play a key role providing frontcourt reinforcements come tournament time. Again, the starting 5 is what gets the job done for Kansas, but they do have other players in place if needed. Now, despite Kansas being first in the Big 12 and their impressive 23-5 record, some people are slow to embrace the Jayhawks as one of the country's top teams, and to be fair, Kansas has had a lot of worrisome games so far this year. Per shot quality, Kansas ranks 4th among projected tournament teams in terms of record luck, a metric that assigns wins and losses to the quality of shots taken and allowed rather than the actual score of the game. While Kansas's actual record is 23-5, their shot quality record is only 17-11. Still a decent team, but not nearly one you'd expect to compete for championships. And looking back on some of their games, it's easy to pinpoint lucky moments. There was the buzzer beater putback from Bobby Pettiford to beat Wisconsin in the battle for Atlantis. There was the controversial no call at the end of the Oklahoma State win. They were losing for the majority of the game against Oklahoma at home before a late surge propelled them to victory. And KJ Adams hit a floater with 12 seconds left to beat Iowa State. So yeah, Kansas has certainly had luck on their side, but I still think it says something that they found ways to win all these games despite not playing their absolute best basketball. And as we all know, playing your absolute best basketball in 6 straight games is incredibly hard to do. So for me, at this point, I'm choosing to be encouraged about Kansas's close wins rather than concerned. Overall, Kansas has the star power, cohesion, and coaching to once again win a national championship. But of course, it's easier said than done. And going back-to-back while losing your top 2 scorers in between titles hasn't been accomplished since the Nixon administration. The odds are certainly stacked against Kansas, but so far, given how the Jayhawks season has gone, would you bet against them? I don't think I would. And that's why Kansas has an incredibly good chance to repeat as national champs. Thanks so much for watching, and give me your thoughts below.